Welcome to Still In It, a 5-MeO DMT Journeys podcast, where I talk to real people about their 5-MeO experience. Our goal is to bring you honest and diverse perspectives about what this medicine is all about. I'm your host, Jessie, and I'm excited to have you along for the ride. So hop in and enjoy as we discuss what preparation, ceremony, and integration look like. This podcast is sponsored by Enfold, offering safe and sacred experiences in British Columbia. To learn more, visit enfold.org. That is enfold.org. Or click the link in the show notes. And now, without further ado, I hope you enjoy today's episode. Hello, and welcome to the podcast. We have a special guest on, as all guests are special, but his name is Mehran, and thank you for joining the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Jessie.
Yeah, not a problem at all. The first question we ask everybody is, what called you to medicine? What made you want to do 5-MeO DMT?
Good question. I think since losing my father about 6 years ago, when it felt like a huge transition in my life, and where almost like a baby, I had to learn how to crawl or walk again, and a lot of old belief systems, a lot of old ways of seeing the world, seeing myself, all of a sudden was shattered. So my journey began when we moved back to Canada in 2018, and I knew about psychedelics. I had done psychedelics, and needed something to help me get through this. An incredible amount of shock, trauma, grief, pain. And so I started to dip my toes in all kinds of medicines, from MDMA to ketamine to, the more gentle medicines, to mushrooms and the plant medicines. I was always very curious about five. My best reference at the point was Hamilton's Pharmacopoeia, watching Hamilton Morris have an experience, and kind of feeling both terrified, but also in awe of its potential. And so I actually, before coming to Enfold, in about 2019 or 2020, decided to do it with two other therapists here in Vancouver. And although they gave me the three, doses from the handshake, the hug, the full embrace, quote unquote, nothing happened, meaning that I expected to blast off. And I kind of lied down, and they began to sing their songs and to hold space for me, expecting me to kind of blast off. And I was just lying there, and I said, guys, I'm still here. I don't feel anything. To their surprise, to my surprise, and to some frustration, to be honest. I was like, why is this happening? It was only later that I realized that the medicine is incredibly intelligent, as our bodies are. And so my nervous system, and probably combined with the intelligence of the medicine, decided that it's not time for me to go there. And so I just felt this incredible nothingness. And although in the moment it felt like, this wasn't what I expected, but it was exactly what my body needed, which was just a very grounding, calm, regulated space of emptiness, if that makes sense. Just like a very deep calm. So I was hoping for the opposite of that, which was to leave, but my body was already doing that. The trauma from the loss of my father had caused me to tune out, dissociate, and leave my body. So that wasn't, what needed to be amplified or reinforced, but rather just coming back to my body. So it provided that experience, which was beautiful in hindsight, even though frustrating at the time. So it was only later, probably in 2022, that I got to meet Steve at a integration circle hosted by a beautiful and wonderful local psychedelic community called the Flying Sage, which I'm also a part of. And I felt, this person has something I need to know. Like I just felt this instant connection, just his very calm, grounded, confident presence and posture. Felt very drawn to him. And as I tend to do with people who I'm drawn to, I get curious. I start asking questions. I start getting in touch. And I ultimately came in early 2023. Um, and coming into it, what was my intention? My intention was to feel love for all parts of myself, love for the parts of me that might have carried some responsibility around what happened, perhaps feeling um, like I could have done more or I didn't do enough, or it's hard to describe really. But um, I always had this idea that healing is supposed to be hard. And so going in, I felt that it's going to be a very challenging experience and that this is supposed to be very hard. But the beautiful setting container that Stephen Austin, from the very moment I arrived, sitting around the dinner table with a group of three other people, I instantly felt at home, or a sense of belongingness that I often don't feel in group settings. So that's really a testament to Enfold and the beautiful space that Stephen Austin have created. And I'm very happy that I was the first to go the following day at 9 a.m. And so I woke up, I did a cold plunge, a sauna, some breath work. I slept relatively well. I didn't sleep the best. The person next to me actually um, suffered from sleep apnea or, was snoring the whole night and
Yeah.
making it very hard for me to sleep, which wasn't ideal. And at one part, I just said, let this one go too. Maybe this was just meant to be the way it is. And even with earplugs, I found it hard to fall asleep. But that was part of my trip too. But I did feel relatively refreshed in the morning, and the grounding exercises, the sauna, cold, and breath work really helped kind of calm my nervous system going in. And it was after the handshake that I felt probably the most jitters or anxiousness or nervousness. It was just like kind of all the anticipation of what's to come and so much of my stuff being right on the surface. And so just by taking a very small dose, my body just started shaking and all of this tremors just running through my body. And it was probably the scariest of the three doses and essentially journeys wrapped in one that I had. And it was just all this lingering energy that had to kind of be released before I can truly surrender into the medicine. Right before taking the hug, the second dose, I was, you know what? This doesn't need to be hard. This can be an incredibly beautiful, loving, light, euphoric, joyful even experience. And so I just, with a big smile, went up, as Steve and Austin, Steve brought over the pipe. Um, and I, just by saying that and naming that as my intention, that's exactly what I got, which was an incredibly blissful, beautiful, blinding white light just washing over me and feeling full surrender, probably for the first time since losing my dad, which, again, never in any of my journeys to that point was I able to fully let go. There was always a part of me that was still holding on, resisting the experience and or challenging it, fighting it, intellectualizing it, dissociating from it, tuning out, all these different ways that we protect ourselves. Yet with this experience, I was able to truly, fully surrender with both the hug and the full embrace dose, which was probably one of the most beautiful experiences of my life, and kind of was such a much needed reset to allow me to start now seeing everything that happened in a new light, in a new perspective, and for that shift that needed to happen to bring me from a very cold, cruel, dark universe to a very beautiful, benevolent, kind universe, which was what I needed and exactly what happened.
That is so beautiful. So you were able to experience that, you said, on the hug, um, or was that
Both
okay?
the hug and the full embrace, yeah.
Wonderful. Yeah, it's what you said there, healing does not have to be hard, really resonated with me. And very similarly to you, like I felt very joyful and more pleasurable, like a pleasure experience while I was under the influence of five. And I'm curious, like, is that you said it was the first time you felt like you had truly surrendered since the death of your father, which, by the way, my condolences.
Thank you.
Is that something that you had struggled with maybe even throughout your life, like feeling like the joy or the pleasure, or was that something directly correlated just to the death? And
Yes, so I am myself a psychedelic assisted therapist. I work with MDMA. I'm trauma informed. I've studied with Gabor Mata. I've studied at CIIS. Not sure if you know of the schools, the California Institute of Integral Studies in the Bay Area. And so I've gone deep in the world of trauma, psychology, healing, holistic healing, and all of it. And like many other helpers, sitters, people in our position where we often extend ourselves to others, I very often prioritized other people's needs before my own, as far back as I can remember. I very often picked up on the more shadowy, deeper, muddy, murky spaces of people's beings, and was quite adept at pinpointing where or how someone and or how trauma showed up in their psyche, in their being, even in their soma, even in their body, even as they spoke, even in how they presented in their posture. And so I think not sure from starting from when, but I got so immersed in the suffering of life, in the suffering of those around me, and perhaps the suffering of my parents, of my community coming from Iran and everything, we've been going through. I was born during the Iran-Iraq War. As I speak to you today, we're witnessing what's unfolding in Gaza and Gaza, pronounced locally. And I've always tapped in, tuned into the suffering and trauma of the world. And so perhaps not recognizing how important it is to experience the flip side, which is the play, which is the joy, which is the euphoria, which is the lightness. It's kind of like the title of a book, I think by Milan Kundera, The Unbearable Lightness of Being. How to be light despite it being unbearable, how to hold seemingly opposing tensions simultaneously, how to be in joy, yet knowing and not closing your heart off to the suffering of the world. And today, literally, what's happening collectively. And I feel that we can either get too stuck in our own bubbles, in our own silos, in our own echo chambers, in our own um, ways of potentially cutting ourselves from suffering or from certain areas of the world or certain events, or we can get too engulfed and too encapsulated and essentially overwhelmed by them. And so my life's journey has been finding a balance between feeling suffering but keeping my heart open and still showing up, or still showing up for my community. And now I work with fellow Persians, I work with non-Persians, and it's been beautiful. We also initiated a Persian-speaking psychedelic society to create a bridge with people back home, or the Persian diaspora, who want to work with psychedelics but just don't know how, where to begin, how to do it, who to do it with, in what context, in what setting. And so we're providing some harm reduction education and how to do it safely without harming themselves or others. And so it's been a beautiful and very meaningful path to incorporate psychedelics into my life, but also in my service and how I show up in the world. So my answers are long-winded, but I hope that answered your question.
oh no, they're beautiful. The way you can articulate and speak is very wonderful. So don't worry about it being long-winded. Um, and no, yeah, you're definitely answering the questions. And I think a lot of people can resonate with um, tapping in more into like the suffering or the pain of life and feeling uncomfortable accessing the other side, which is just like there is both, and they're often simultaneously being held, but it's easier and sometimes more comfortable for people, especially from a trauma background, to live in the pain. It's like, it's, even though they don't necessarily like it, it's just, it's consistent, it's known. And I'm wondering, like, you did 5-MeO, you've learned, you like saw like this like light and the playful side of life. How did you find the integrating of that into like regular life? And like, have you used other substances or any practices after that help you on more of a day-to-day micro level, like be able to access that state instead of living more into the suffering?
The closest I've come to reliving that experience has been revisiting Enfold for the communal events that they hold on a, correct me if I'm wrong, but an almost monthly basis now. And I just, the music can reconnect me. Bamboo, their beautiful dog, who I believe passed away, and my heart goes out to them, was sitting outside in the balcony. And so it was such an incredible and beautiful presence. I have two German short-haired pointers, so my dogs can take me back there. Just this morning, I did the circa breath work that Steve and Austin, I believe, both contributed to, and is available on Spotify. So I just listened to that, did a breath work before joining you. And so that was another way to reconnect, to my heart, to this space that lives inside of me, inside of all of us. So breath work, hot and cold, the sauna and cold has really helped. What else? I think bridging has really helped, if that makes sense. Bridging, my father, he was an academic and environmentalist, a beautiful person who contributed so much to Iran for a couple of decades. And so I feel at my best when I'm in this role of bridging community, bridging perspective, bridging ideology, bridging people together, despite, opposing realities and diverse perspective. And I experienced that within Iran. I experienced that here in North America. I experience it all the time. And so the sense of purpose, meaning that I derive has kind of been an integration for me, just continuing to show up and be of service, if that makes sense. But in terms of anything else, like more practical on a daily basis, I can imagine microdosing helps a lot, although I've kind of been on and off microdosing protocols. But I just want to keep going back to community because that just seems to be probably the most alive I feel when meeting people who've had these experiences, who are on a similar path as I am, and are kind of lost, confused, figuring it out, a mess, all kinds of parts showing up, just authentic in their messiness, so to speak, rather than trying to put on a show, put on a mask, pretend like I got my shit together, or, what we tend to experience often in society, that I need to show up a certain way in order to be accepted, seen, loved, etc. So it's been very refreshing to have communities like the Flying Sage, where I can just be me.
That's beautiful. For Flying Sage, is it also a virtual? Is there any virtual stuff, or is it only more for the local Vancouver community?
So far, it's been mostly in person. So anything from integration circles to ecstatic dance events to breath work to medicine-assisted breath work, or they have cold plunges at the ocean every Wednesday morning. So a bunch of events, 5 to 6 events
Oh,
a
cool.
week, and mostly in person so far. But they're also planning on doing a bunch of virtual stuff as well as we
Okay.
speak.
Okay. I want to go back a little bit to your integration. So I know you mentioned some like grounding practices or practices, and you think that might be helpful for people to tap into more the joy or the light side. How was your actual integration though? So you came and saw this like blissful experience, and then you entered back into reality. Like, how long was your integration? Was it challenging?
I'm just trying to
That's okay.
recall, reconnect to how my experience was. I definitely felt incredibly lighter in the days and weeks that followed. It gave me hope again, something that was gone almost entirely from my life, that there's no point continuing. I wouldn't say that I had reached suicidal ideation, but it did reach a pretty dark place where I didn't find much meaning, purpose, reason to persist or continue. So it gave me enough space and capacity to just continue to breathe as long as I have a breath, to continue to show up for my community, for my mother and brother and the dogs, our family, for my community, for the work I do. I became more aware in terms of my own patterns and how I can fall back into one of my defenses or protectors is the intellect. I can get heady or intellectual about things. I can sometimes tune out or dissociate when I get stressed. I can overextend myself when I need this kind of external love, validation, testimonial from clients or others. And so I became a lot more mindful of my traps, so to speak, and what pulled me back in to old ways. And I think you kind of touched on this, that sometimes for a lot of people, the old ways that are more familiar, comfortable, habitual, is a groove that they've dug so deeply that it's easy to fall back into. So constantly throwing fresh snow, if I can use that metaphor, to realize that no, this is what I choose. This is how I choose to show up now, giving myself agency, autonomy, authenticity in terms of how I show up, to be able to say no when I need to be able to do what makes me feel good, to have to say no to clients that I just don't feel a resonance with, even though it's painful, it's hard, to be able to, this word boundaries is very hard for us collectivist kind of Persian folks to understand because we're so enmeshed in our familial relationships and kind of all up in each other's, faces and lives. And so that's been an important practice to know kind of, how to hold boundaries with even people you love and are very close. So it's been a dance, it's been a process. I have done other medicine journeys ever since. I tend to lean towards the more gentle medicines, the synthetics like MDMA or 3-MMC, because they really allow me to work with and honor the parts, the protectors that I just spoke of. Like dissociation, I call him Mr. D. Like I even have a name for him. I know exactly like how he shows up, where he shows up in my body, how to engage with him and work with him rather than bypass him and blast through him or ignore him, reject him, judge him. And so with these medicines, almost in real time, I get to engage and be with and converse with my intellect, my dissociation, my anger, my rage, my grief, my pain, whatever it might be. I just kind of work with them before getting into the deep core wounded little kid who's just incredibly upset that he lost his dad. And why did it have to happen the way it did? Because it's impossible to reconcile from a linear, rational, analytical perspective. And so I had no choice but to go to these deeper parts of my psyche, my being, my soul, in order to access healing. And so 5-MeO really catalyzed that, but then the integration practices, as well as some of the more gentle medicines, not that 5 isn't gentle, but it can be a relatively short term, more intense experience compared to MDMA or 3-MMC that normally lasts from 3 to 5 hours, for example. And with 5, for example, a lot of the integration happens afterwards, but I found that with MDMA or 3-MMC, the integration can happen during, in real time. And so that's why it has benefited me. But I probably did need some of these more deeper, intense experiences to bring things up to the surface before being able to process, reconcile, and integrate them with these other tools and technologies.
Oh my God, I have so many things to say. First off, shout out to 3MMC and MDMA, but I totally agree. We should definitely link your website in the bio because I think 3MMC is a beautiful drug and it's actually something we're launching a new retreat structure where you start off with a light dose 5, which you mentioned handshake could be kind of more difficult, but it kind of shakes things up and opens the nervous system a bit. And then we actually go into like a 3MMC ceremony, which I think now knowing that you know what it's like, it's such a beautiful way to integrate. And I do truly believe that like you can do a lot of the compassionate integration and feeling very safe to access certain parts that you never felt safe to like really explore. Um, And then we go into the regular 5-MeO ceremony. This happens over 5 days. But nonetheless, you did mention that like it's so easy to get into like the habitual groove of like maybe your protectors that you live in. Why do you think it's so easy to do that and harder to go into the other parts? Like I have my thoughts on identity and how like the habits that we constantly do kind of outline our identity, and part of a lot of individuals integration process is about this whole destabilizing aspect of 5-MeO where you realize your identity is very mobile, I guess, like your parts are kind of like all out to be shown. And did
Yeah.
you find that hard to like reintegrate all your different parts or like live in the other parts?
Yeah, I mean, the ego is kind of synonymous with the parts or protectors. It's essentially, what is the ego? It's really trying hard to keep us separate. And the deeper parts, the more authentic parts, recognize how interconnected, holistic, all these words we hear, we truly are. And the protectors or the parts are part of our persona, our personality, like you mentioned, our identity. And so it's fucking scary to lose touch with, these parts because we've held on to them for so long. The unfortunate reality is that the present day circumstance, given the parts that we have, has to become so awful that we're finally willing to try something new or different, or recognizing that finally they're not really serving me, they're hindering me. And these medicines help us not reject, judge, or want to fix, change those parts, but to welcome them. Kind of like the Rumi poem, The Guest House, welcoming guests, even if their shoes are dirty, or even if they come unexpected, or even if they arrive without us really having planned for it, but welcoming them. And so these medicines really allow us to welcome these parts that are actually hindering us from being our true selves, being our authentic selves, being our deeper core selves. For example, I had a part which was doubt, self-doubt. Like, am I good enough? Who am I to offer this medicine? Who am I to speak about this stuff? Who's going to listen? Who gives you that authority? Who gives you that, right to speak or hold medicine or serve? And so, in order to quell my own levels of self-doubt, I had to go to like the best school in the US to get another master's degree, to do psychedelic therapy training with them, with MAPS, to study with Gabor Mate, to do like just a handful of different trainings, modalities, and approaches, in order to reconcile my own levels of self-doubt, to do what I've always been meant to be doing. My dad's death was a catalyst to bring me to this work, to bring me to who I am. An incredibly painful process and journey, but that's, we either resist the universe or welcome it. And so I really had no choice. I was kind of thrown into the deep end and ultimately had to learn how to swim again. But very clearly recognizing that unless we work with the parts, we welcome them, dare I say, even love them, it's very hard to access these deeper parts of our being.
Yeah, it's hard.
Yeah,
But again, like I'm trying to like you shift the paradigm of thinking that like life is hard, healing is hard. We have this idea like hard, life is like so hard. Work has to be hard in order for you to feel productive. Similar to you, like you did a bunch of trainings, right? It's just like it seems like it comes from this idea that like your your worth had to be proved through these like hard programs, even though I'm sure they're very enjoyable, um, in order for you to even be able to be like, okay, I can offer this. I am worthy to offer this, right? So it's like we always feel like it has to have hard work in order to get to like our destination. And that paradigm is something that I think that North America collectively and perhaps other parts of the world um, run and operate under, right?
totally. Like the harder I work, the more success I can have, or the more full my calendar is, like the more, a better outcome is possible. Or what just came to mind was that even looking at it in the context of receiving or being worthy of love, I need to work hard for love, which was actually part of my process and journey. I need to work hard for love, as if me just being me wasn't deserving of Stephen Austin's incredible capacity to love and hold space and offer compassion and empathy to those they serve, as if I had to somehow work for their love, you know? And we need to like do A, B, C, D in order to be deserving of that love. So how often do we need to obtain status, accolades, titles, um, mm, a certain level in order to be worthy? You know, but why can't we just be me, messy and all, kind of like I mentioned, and still be deserving of love? I mean, that's ultimately what we all want, is to be seen, to be acknowledged, to belong, and to be loved. That's really what it all boils down to. And
100%.
yeah, and it's so interesting that we create this false narrative or illusion of not being worthy of love, and that becomes our life's work, which is to narrow that gap, to narrow that space between I'm unworthy, no, but I am worthy of love. And these medicines help bridge that gap essentially.
100%. Yeah, I totally agree. I wanted to first say that every single one of us are messy and flawed, and it's so funny that we all go out into the world trying to like prove the opposite, and then we're also like, that part of me can never be loved, but I'm like, it is so inherent to all of us. So it's just like this weird little game we're all almost playing. And I do agree, like bridging the gap between I am worthy and I am unworthy, like that thought process there, because it's one rationally to be like, we are all worthy of love and happiness, etc. But what I found that 5 a.m. MEO was really good at was actually like allowing you to tap into the felt sense of the world, like that your body has an
Mm.
intuitive sense that we often neglect or not tap into. And I didn't even understand what that even meant until after I did five. Perhaps you were way more into somatics before you entered into or came to Enfold. But
I had studied it, but I wasn't connected to my own body. Yeah.
yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, no, what also came up in terms of the somatic feeling and experience of receiving love. Well, first of all, that itself is an art, is a skill. A lot of people resist five because they're afraid of receiving love. Imagine like how crazy of a world we live in, that due to be um our context, upbringing, birth, or childhood or trauma, we did not have perhaps an experience of feeling love, not perhaps always intentional from our caretakers or parents' side, but because they just didn't know any better. And so feeling or receiving love is scary. And so imagine that so much of the resistance or people not wanting to surrender into the medicine is being afraid of love. And yet, when we actually just allow it to trickle in, be felt, and swim in it, it's the most incredibly beautiful, euphoric, ecstatic experience. But that's also so interesting that's essentially one of our key resistance to this medicine.
Well, what I found from speaking to guests before and after, I swear, and this is why like I think psychedelics get termed very like in a hippie way, but it all you like it is all about love. And we look at love in such a narrow niche field, like it's romantic love or relational love.
Yeah.
And I went in with a very similar intention to you, which is like I was basically like seeking love. Didn't really even know what that meant. Part of me thought it was like I need to find a relationship because I find that I was like, very like avoidant to it, and I kind of went in with that intention, being like, "What is that about?" And then I came out with this realization that love is so much more expansive in nature than I realized. It's like our language
Mm.
really narrows this idea of what love has to be, and
Yes.
love is actually just omnipresent. You are love. The world is love, and it's not just about this romantic Valentine's Day esque like definition and lens that we look at it in.
Totally, totally. For many people, it was taught relationally. And so many people who go to therapy these days are under the impression or illusion, if I may say, that we were not loved at a certain part in our lives, you know? Um, and that is what has caused essentially my present day made manifest, you know, diagnosis or attachment wounds or relational trauma or whatever way I describe it. Another beautiful thing with these medicines, including five, is the ability to love oneself. So even if it is relational, it's still internal. It's still within me. It doesn't need someone to say a certain thing, to do a certain thing, to validate me a certain way, to tell me I love you. But rather, imagine waking up and looking in the mirror, looking in my own eyes and speaking to myself in the mirror, I love you. And how hard even that exercise can be for some people. But imagine doing that all the time. And this is kind of how you feel coming out of these five experiences. You just want to hug yourself. You want to like thank your body and thank yourself for like, you know, showing up the way you have, despite it all, despite so much, and loving all aspects, all parts of yourself, including your wrinkles, including your skin, your body type, whatever it might be. And, oof, yeah, it really is an art to be able to feel that within ourselves and to be able to reparent, if I may use that phrase, all parts of ourselves internally. This is an inside job, truly. And this is the illusion that sometimes we think that it's someone else that is giving me all the love. So once they're gone, I can no longer feel that, but they're just mirroring what's already inside of me.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that romantic partner or, you know, the way someone makes me feel. They're essentially just mirrors, triggers, um, doorways, pathways to that place of love that exists within us. The way Ram Dass, one of my teachers, would speak about it is imagine sitting in a hot tub of love, and all of a sudden someone joins you in the hot tub, and you're feeling all warm and fuzzy and beautiful and wonderful. And even when they leave the hot tub, it doesn't mean that the love is gone. You're still swimming, you're still sitting in it. And so, very silly, simple example, but that's exactly true.
Well, yeah, I think everything that happens in life, including relationships, it's all making you feel things. And I think like we're so detached from realizing those feelings actually come from within. Like, even though somebody may have like triggered it, it's still you feeling it. And it's like you are capable of that. It's just, we like 5-MeO acts as like a death and a rebirth, and almost like you come out, you almost have this nervous system of a baby, and you're almost like relearning in a way, like, whoa, what was that? Like I had felt something and realizing like, oh, okay, life doesn't have to be the way I'm looking at it. Like a lot of it was just taught um by their society or your parents or whatever on like how to interact with this like universe. So I think part of that comes down to the fact that like, oh, love is inside of me and others, and I had come into this universe alone. I will die from this universe alone. Doesn't mean that you shouldn't negate like connection. We are connective beings, whatnot. But it's like learn to ground yourself in like the, I don't know, the infinite like love that you can feel, and that feels so uncomfortable. Just feeling like, oh, I am okay all on my own. I have everything I need inside. And that almost like is like, that can't be true. I need to go to everywhere else to
Yeah,
find it.
protectors apart, it's the ego that wants to keep us separate from love, essentially. Again, not to make the ego the enemy. It's a beautiful tool and technology that we can utilize and use to our advantage. It's a beautiful servant, but a lousy master, as they say. But um, yes, how can I tap into, feel into, as you mentioned, this omnipresent frequency that is there all the time? But why is it that we need to sign up for a retreat or take these medicines in order to feel that? Why is it so hard to feel it without these things? Why is it so hard to do nothing? Why is it hard to empty or clear our calendars? Why is it so hard to not have to do, to effort, to please, to say yes all the time, to all the commitments, all the external relational stuff that we get stuck into. If I feel and this is what I encourage in my own offerings, is to reach a beautiful, poignant, pregnant pause of stillness, of emptiness, of quietness, where finally in that frequency, it's incredible the way the body in that moment knows exactly what to do. The emotions come up to the surface, the sensations come up, and all I'm doing, or the person taking the medicine is doing, is breathing, and the body is leading. It's doing everything it needs to do. Yet we are so accustomed in our society to be led by our minds and by our doing and by our, forcing and efforting and controlling and manipulating and changing and fixing and, all this, that we never actually quiet down enough to tap into that omnipresent sense of love that exists at all times, like right now, as we speak, me and you, we can tap into it. So, I think you also mentioned this, that we tend to conceptualize it, limit it, intellectualize it, think that it's only available in a certain way or only in relationships or whatever. We box it, we limit it, but it's so much more expansive, available, accessible than we might think it is.
100%. And like why it feels so uncomfortable to do nothing, and that everything needs to be like you have to work for that or do these things to get it. I mean, I have my own theory on that. I think it comes from the fact that doing nothing and just being and tapping into that just as you are, it creates all this space, and the space is scary because it then creates what I think is existential anxiety about, well, what is this? If I'm busy doing and achieving and trying to get these things that I don't think I inherently have, I don't have really space and time to really debate the realities of life, if that makes sense. And that in itself is just like the most anxiety producing thing. It's just like we are.
Well, another way of putting it is a fear of uncertainty, because
Mm-hmm.
I would rather be in the familiar, comfortable known than in the unfamiliar, uncomfortable unknown. So, in those moments of silence, even if an existential dread or anxiety may arise, that's probably initially, but once we just allow enough stillness and just kind of breathing through it, I would like to think that on the other side is actually incredibly blissful, quiet, peaceful, grounding, beautiful. And so, yes, when we go silent, there'll probably be something that we've been putting on hold for 45 years. But when it does present itself and we manage to stay with it, sit with it, engage with it, breathe through it, the other side is quite beautiful. It's almost like thinking there was a monster under my bed my whole life, to finally peek below to realize there was nothing there. So it really is, even what you phrased as existential anxiety was the word you used, or existential dread,
Yeah.
is mind manifest in my mind, in my perspective. But when I
True.
sit with that, it's actually not as scary as I give it credit.
Yeah. Yeah. And then the other thing I want to touch on, you mentioned why do we need to go to retreats or whatnot to like finally feel these things? And I think part of that, and Sam Harris talks about it in one of his podcasts called The Paradox of Psychedelics, is just
Mm,
you actually don't even know what you're aiming for or how to feel or that goalpost, if you will. And you feel that when you do certain psychedelics. And that just kind of opens up this idea of like, oh, that can be achieved, or I am starting to understand a different layer to my life or to myself. And that allows you to work towards that in a way or know how to feel into that. Because like you spoke about, like you had studied somatics, but it wasn't until perhaps after doing psychedelics that you understood the intuition of the body. And similar to me, it's like I rationally understood what somatics were in some level, but I didn't understand the connection to even like my gut feeling until after the retreat. And the
totally.
more I
It's
can
kind
lean
of
into that.
like, if I want to learn how to meditate, there's a big difference between using an app to meditate 5 minutes a day, which is beautiful in itself. We now have Headspace, and Sam Harris has with the Waking Up app, and these tools and modalities at our disposal. But I personally went to a 10-day, Vipassana silent meditation retreat to really see how far or how deep like meditation on its own can go can take me, because essentially you're momentarily switching off technology, social media, everything else, and concentrating on, or perhaps sitting for 10 hours, or if not longer, a day, for 10 days. And then on day 7, I experienced like just a brief respite of all the noise in my monkey mind, and was able to be with my body. Or even, and people probably won't believe me when I say this, but I had just a brief glimpse of watching myself meditate as a witness. And so I tapped into witness consciousness, which one can call soul, love, bliss, whatever, spirit. And so the moment I thought that, I came back, like I lost touch with that. And so the moment you try to grasp it like sand between the fingers, it just like disappears. But the way Sam Harris, in that very podcast that you had mentioned, is that if someone just starts meditating without knowing what the end result is like, then it's much harder to get there. So by taking a medicine, even MDMA or 3-MMC, but especially something like, a higher dose of mushrooms or ayahuasca or 5-MeO DMT, we have a goalpost. We have this idea of what it actually feels like to be there, and therefore giving us more motivation, passion, purpose to meditate daily in order to get there. But if you just ask someone to just meditate without knowing what the end result is, it's often, most people give up. Let's be
Totally.
Honest. And, or I think the way he also described it was, imagine Jimi Hendrix playing the guitar and playing like the most just incredible piece of music that we've all heard. And with the help of a 5 experience, you get to feel that music in every cell, every, tendon, muscle, part of your being, and you become the music almost. But imagine if you just wanted to start learning to play the guitar and just kind of like, I don't know what the phrase is, but just like playing with the string. It's much harder to imagine what the output, the end result, which is Jimi Hendrix playing the symphony of music using his guitar. And so, yes, by experiencing that, it'll be easier to learn playing the guitar, basically, is what we're saying.
Yay. Yeah. Okay. So I love that you also know the podcast. I often sometimes refer it to people because that's the way I kind of look at psychedelics as a tool to be able to access these states of consciousness in order for you to start integrating or have a goalpost or an understanding of like what to work towards. Because it's like perfect practice makes perfect or whatever, but it just practice on its own. If you're like trying to get the perfect golf swing, but you have no idea what the perfect golf swing is, you're going to be like practicing the wrong in almost like the wrong direction, and you're going to be
Yeah.
perfecting a bad golf swing. So it's like similar to that is how I look at it. With all that being said, like for someone who wants to like start to do like let's say work with just 5-MeO DMT, like do you have anything you would recommend or feedback to give, like okay, if somebody was to look for a retreat or take this medicine, like what is something that you wish to share with them?
Well, the first is that you'd be in very good hands with Stephen Austin at Enfold, not just because I want to promote them or market them or speak. I truly, deeply mean that they are such beautiful people. They have such incredible energy and are such incredible space holders that instantly quelled and calmed any nerves I had going in. But along those lines, I would highly encourage that people intuitively recognize when is the right time, the right person, the right space or setting for them, depending on their unique predicament and circumstance. There are many paths to God, however you feel about that word, spirit, love. But we all have a unique path to get there. And as I learned the hard way, we can't force, rush, control that path. And that's probably why the medicine didn't work for me the first time. I had done it a couple of years ago. And there was a reason why I was able to fully surrender at Enfold, because it was probably the right place, right person, right time. And so really being honest with ourselves. What is my intention? Where am I? Am I feeling incredibly anxious and unstable? Then perhaps it may not be the best time for me to enter this. What are my expectations or mindset, so to speak? Am I going in thinking that this will be a therapeutic experience? Is going to be like, am I looking for a more fun, seeing God, seeing visual sacred geometry, which is beautiful, but essentially, like, why now? Why am I doing this? Where am I doing? Who am I doing it with? And really being honest with ourselves when answering those questions, because even when we may feel like there is no connection, but we always are, even if slightly, connected to our intuition, into our body's needs, and into what feels right in the moment. So really, when you speak with Stephen Austin or any practitioner, any space holder, anyone offering these medicines, really sense how it feels in your body. Does this feel true? Does this feel resonant? Does this feel aligned? Does this feel safe? And that will really aid us in how we ultimately show up when actually taking the medicine.
Beautiful. I 100% agree. I feel like you and I have a
Mhm.
lot of overlap. Overall, Mehran, thank you so much for like your beautiful wisdom. We'll link all your information in the show notes, and thank you for taking this time to share your experience and your wealth of knowledge.
Thank you. Thank you, Jesse. I really enjoyed it. And I also felt the same. So thanks for creating such a beautiful container, and I'm sure a beautiful podcast that is going to help a lot of people.
Thanks for listening to the Still In It podcast. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you're interested in hearing more, the best thing you could do is to leave us a review. This allows us to continue to record and inform others on the 5MEO experience. If you want to join our beloved community or learn more about us, feel free to visit us at enfold.org. That is enfold.org.